Hello and welcome back to Bookish, and welcome to my 19 short books, short novels recommendation, or short books recommendation I should say. This is in honor of Shorty September, which I'm only really participating in the sense that I'm reading short books. I'm not really keeping up with the kind of prompts that they've created for Shorty September. And up to this point, I've been really remiss in leaving links to the Shorty September sponsors, so I'm going to try to remember to do that today. But I thought, you know, this is going to go up, I think, somewhere around the 19th of September, right around there. Kind of got my days a little mixed up. This is going to go up somewhere around the 19th of September. I thought by then, maybe you've read your short books fast, you thought you were going to, and you're looking for other short novel recommendations. So I thought I would do that. So I just pulled 19 short books off my shelves. Most of them are novels, some of them are nonfiction, and one of them has an incredibly torn up cover, which I'll show you anyway. So without further ado, here we go. So one novel I would recommend is Chester Himes' The Real Cool Killers. This is one of his novels involving the detectives Coffin Ed Johnson and Gravedigger Jones, two black detectives working in a predominantly white police department in Harlem, and they have a unique sense of an idea of justice and a unique way, and oftentimes a violent way, of meeting that out. But Chester Himes is a great writer, really great if you're interested in crime, mystery, the time period, just a really great novel. I've read two of his novels so far. I think they're great. Another short novel you might read is Invisible Cities by Italo Calvino. In this, the framing for this is that Marco Polo is telling stories about cities that he visited to the Kublai Khan. The stories are based around the cities he describes are based around the thematic ideas, and he talks about, I want to say, right around 100 cities in here. If you've never read an Italo Calvino, this might be a good place to get started, because I think it's really kind of fascinating, and you can kind of dip in and out of it. A lot of the chapters are relatively short. Anyway, just a great book. I know not everybody likes Italo Calvino, but I do. One of my books of the year from last year, Quiet Flows, the Una by Farouk Zek. This novel basically is like the PTSD remembrances of a soldier who fought in the wars in Bosnia, and remembering and kind of dealing with the horrors that he experienced, sometimes the horrors that he and his comrades inflicted, and kind of also a really meditative piece about the River Una and about fishing, and it really is beautiful in lots of ways. I would really encourage you to read it. It can make for rough reading in patches, but I just thought it was really good. Another book I read a few years ago, maybe 2 years ago, for Women in Translation Month, I believe, was Minor Detail by Adana Shibley, and it was translated, I should say this was translated by Elizabeth Jaquette. By the way, I should say that Quiet Flows the Una was translated by Will Firth, and Invisible Cities was translated by, I really should have done this to begin with, sorry, by William Weaver. So this novel tells two parallelish stories set in Israel and Palestine, about essentially two Palestinian women whose lives are affected by Israeli occupation, by contact with Israeli soldiers, one who goes essentially searching for the history of the other. It's really, in lots of places, the first section of this is incredibly disturbing and it can be really hard to read. The second part is really a little bit more meditative, is that the word? And the two stories connect in a really powerful way, and I just thought it was really, really great. Getting into kind of American classic, I would recommend wholeheartedly John Steinbeck's Cannery Row. This book weighs in at about 125 pages, and this really old, what is this, a Signet issue? This is a Bantam Books paperback. You may have noticed that John Steinbeck does not feature heavily on my channel, even though I feature a lot of other American authors of his generation on my channel. I don't feature Steinbeck, and that's because I did not like The Grapes of Wrath. I think I'm the only person in America who didn't like it, didn't care for it, and I kind of shied away from Steinbeck's larger works. His shorter works I love a lot of, and I think Cannery Row is the best. This is basically set where is it set? It's set in California. I want to say it's, oh shoot, no, I forgot. Anyway, it's set in a California community along a street in which there are all these sardine canneries, and it involves a very educated man who makes his money by collecting samples for scientific purposes. He's a scientist. It involves some down on their luck kind of drunks. It involves prostitutes. It is it can be incredibly funny. It's also incredibly poignant. And I think it has a lot of, and I think like a lot of John Steinbeck's shorter novels, it has a lot to say about how we judge people based on their outward appearance or based on what we assume about people who do what they do for a living. I just think it's really great. It's my favorite of John Steinbeck. Last year, the year before last, I read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson for Victober. I'll be reading another Stevenson, I think The Black Arrow, this year for Victober. If you haven't read Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, it's really, really good. Robert Louis Stevenson is a very good writer, and I don't think I need to tell you about the basics of the story, but I think you'll be surprised about how modern it feels and how good the writing and the story are and how compelling it is. A book I'm almost positive I've never mentioned on my channel before, and that was I Was Amelia Earhart by Jane Mendelsohn. I believe Jane Mendelsohn was nominated for the Pulitzer, maybe it was the National Book Award for this. It's a really short novel in which she imagines that she is Amelia Earhart, the American aviator who tried to circumnavigate the globe and whose plane was lost after it took off from a location, I think, along the coast of New Guinea, and never heard from again. And the mystery of what happened to her and her male companion who was on the flight with her, has never really been solved. I really, really enjoyed this. If you've never picked this up and you can find a copy, it's only about 145 pages. I think it's an entertaining and engaging read and well worth your time. Also, I don't think I've mentioned very often The Quiet American by Graham Greene. On this channel, it's the only Graham Greene novel I've ever read, and it weighs in at about 185 pounds. This is a story about betrayal and distrust and the way in which the imperialist powers, particularly the United States, precipitated the disaster which took place in Vietnam, fed that disaster, and is told through the eyes of one man and his relatively selfish desire to gain the thing that he wants. I thought it was really, really good. And for whatever reason, I've never read another Graham Greene. Maybe I just thought that was so good I didn't want to ruin it. Another short novel I could highly recommend is more recent, and that is Panenka by Ronan Hession. Ronan Hession wrote Leonard and Hungry Paul, one of my absolute favorite books from recent times. This is his second novel, and this involves an Irish soccer player who makes a huge mistake in a really important game, and he's known forever for that mistake. That ruins his life, his marriage, and this story is basically about him kind of finding his feet and putting it all back together again, and coming to terms with the damage he's done and the people he's done damage to, and then coming to terms with him. It is surprisingly powerful, is what I would say, and beautifully written. A book I talked about quite a bit when I first started my channel is Einstein's Dreams by Alan Lightman. Alan Lightman was a scientist, I believe he's a physicist, and he wrote this kind of imagined book about how Einstein came up with his theories. And I love this little edition of the book that I have, and it comes in, I think it's around 170 pages, but it's a small book, so no matter what edition you have it in, I think it's going to read like it's even shorter. And I just found it to be really, really interesting. I read another of Lightman's books later, which I didn't like as much, called Reunion, which involves time travel, which I didn't think was particularly successful, but I really loved this book. Again, if you're looking for classics, I can highly recommend Silas Marner by George Eliot. Victober's coming up next month, and if you're looking for a short George Eliot to read, I think this is the one. Surprisingly beautiful, powerful story about love and redemption and, kind of tragic circumstances, and I just thought it was really, really good. Surprised me in lots of ways, and I think you get kind of an idea of how great a writer George Eliot was without maybe having to commit to Middlemarch. Another book I can highly recommend, and that's The Red Badge of Courage by Stephen Crane. In my edition, there are other stories here too. So this little tiny edition, which again, this is a Signet classic from a million years ago, contains the novel The Red Badge of Courage, which is less than 100 and 30 pages long, which is kind of a classic of American war literature, which is something I was really interested in for quite some time. Interestingly, though Stephen Crane wrote it, and it is about the American Civil War. Crane was not a soldier in the American Civil War. It has a lot of really kind of naturalist themes, or not naturalist. It has a lot of themes where you have man versus nature, man versus man. You know, kind of a lot of the classic themes of literature we were taught back when we were in school. I think it's really good, and I think Stephen Crane's books in general and stories should be read far more often. An author I hardly ever mention is Saul Bellow, and the only novel that I really feel somewhat comfortable recommending of his is Seize the Day. You'll notice this is another one of the books, like my edition of Complete Stories of Flannery O'Connor, that one of my old dogs got a hold of and chewed up and ripped the corner off of. Sorry, I'm not going to get a prettier edition of this. But Saul Bellow, kind of, a lot of people thought of him as one of the most important writers of kind of the mid 20th century in the United States of America. Published a lot of books. A lot of his books have, and I think this one does too, have a lot of kind of misogynist overtones in how he dealt with women. This book basically involves the story of a kind of middle-aged man who has kind of failed at all his dreams and everything he's attempted to get. His father, he has to deal with his father, who is disappointed in him, to say the least. And anyway, it's about kind of how he comes to terms with his life in the past and maybe decides to move forward. No surprise on my channel that you probably figured out I was going to talk about a novel by Honoré de Balzac, and so I'm going to recommend as a short, really short novel, Colonel Chabert. This is really, I think, one of Balzac's first novels, and I think it gives you a really great kind of view into the way in which Balzac constructs his novels, the way he brings his characters together, the intricacy of those novels, and kind of his ability to tell powerful stories. If you've read Balzac, you know there's almost always some kind of love affair involved, and in this case there is. And there's oftentimes characters who are just completely kind of venal and self-serving, and there's usually selfless character. That's true here. I think this is a good introduction. Don't buy this edition. This was one of those, you know, kind of print on demands, and it's paginated terribly, and there are no page numbers. I listened to an audiobook of this on LibriVox, which is free, while I followed the text just to make sure that it was correct, because I've gotten ebooks and print-on-demand books where actually it was not correct at all. It's something to be aware of. I've talked about this book on my channel before. That's Chronicle of Death Foretold by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. This is a story essentially about, in a way, an honor killing, and I found it to be incredibly powerful. It's not very long. If you're looking for an entree point to reading Gabriel Garcia Marquez, I think this is a good one. You get a good idea of his style, his writing, kind of the mix of realism and slightly magical things going on. You can find all the best elements of Marquez, I think you can find in Chronicle of Death Foretold. Then the rest of my books are nonfiction. I think we'll have, four more. The rest of my books are nonfiction. I just wanted to make sure that I talked about Breathe, The Letter to My Sons by Imani Perry. Imani Perry, writer and academic, and mother to two African-American sons. And this short book is essentially her trying to impart the lessons, the things she wants her sons to carry forward, to remember, the things she wants them to be careful about, the things, you know, where she's encouraging them to stand out, to speak out, and where she is thinking about all the dangers that African-American young men face in the United States of America. It is similar to, and I can't say that it's not in some ways, inspired by Ta-Nehisi Coates' Between the World and Me, but this takes the point of view of a mother talking to her sons, and in lots of ways, I think this is more powerful. Now, I read this for judging the BookTube Prize, the very first time I judged BookTube Prize in round one, and I kind of dismissed it as derivative, and I went back and reread it, and I really think that was unfair. So I'd encourage you to read that. Then you probably are aware of this. I recently read On Juneteenth by historian Annette Gordon Reed, who grew up in Texas and writes about the significance of Juneteenth. She writes about the evolution of the civil rights movement and movements away from desegregation here in Texas and elsewhere. and writes about kind of and connects those things to the current state of affairs. I thought this was just a really great book, and I would encourage you to read it. A while back, I read A Dear Friend from My Life, I Write to You in Your Life by Yi-Yoon Lee. It's kind of a memoir of her dealing with depression and mental instability and I believe institutionalization, if I remember correctly, and how she kind of grounded herself by reading and thinking about books a lot. And I found this to be really powerful, even though there's lots of it I'm pretty sure I didn't understand. But it's a good read. Yi-Yoon Lee was kind of a big deal when I read this book, and I believe she's kind of fallen out. But I think this is a really good book. And then the last book I wanted to recommend for Shorty September is Longitude, the true story of how a lone genius solved the biggest problem in the 17th century, which by the way was how to measure distance as we go around the Earth, like from east to west. How we measure longitude when the Earth is turning. Anyway, so this is why longitude is measured in minutes, by the way. And the person who solved it is somebody who essentially invented a clock capable of keeping accurate time, particularly on board seagoing vessels. It's just a really, really good history. If you're interested in kind of micro history, I would highly recommend this. It's about 170 to 180 pages. Anyway, there you go. There are my 19 short book recommendations for what's left of Shorty September. If you've read these books, if you haven't read these books, you're interested in these books, look forward to your comments in the comment section below. And as always, thank you for watching.